Let me ask you something personal. How old are you? Go ahead. I'll wait. No answer? Smart. Because you were raised to know that's private information. And up until now, the internet agreed with you. But here's the thing. That's about to change. And not in a small, subtle way. We're talking about a law that will force your computer's operating system, the deepest layer of software on your device, to know exactly how old you are before it lets you do basically anything online. By January 1st, 2027, Windows, Mac, Android, and even Linux will be legally required to collect your age at setup, and then hand that information to any app or website that asks for it. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's already written into law. And while most people were busy following the news cycle, the Epstein files, the political drama, the endless scroll, lawmakers around the world quietly started doing something else. They started passing age verification laws, one after another, almost simultaneously. Coincidence? Maybe. But stick around, because what's really going on here is a lot more interesting than it first appears. In this video, you're going to find out exactly what this law does, who's behind it, why the biggest names in tech are completely fine with it, and why one tiny Linux script just became the most rebellious piece of code on the internet. This is the story of age verification, digital surveillance, and the fight for your right to exist anonymously online. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to look at your operating system very differently. Let's start from the beginning, because to understand what's happening now, you need to understand what just happened in California. Back in October 2025, California passed something called the Digital Age Assurance Act. And on the surface, it sounds completely reasonable. Almost boring even. It's a law about age verification. Big deal, right? Well, here's where it gets interesting. Every single lawmaker in California voted for it. Not one dissenting voice. Now think about that for a second. California politicians agree on almost nothing. But this, unanimous. And what exactly did they all agree to? That every general purpose operating system, meaning every computer and phone sold or used in California, must collect the user's age. And not just collect it, but make it available through an API, a kind of digital doorway, so that any app or website can ask your OS, hey, how old is this person? And the OS will answer. Right now, when you visit a website that's supposed to be age restricted, what happens? You get a pop-up that says something like, enter your date of birth. And you type in some random date from 1985 and move on. Nobody checks. Nobody cares. It's a legal formality, nothing more. Those days are numbered. Under this new system, age verification doesn't happen on the website, it happens at the operating system level, which means the source of truth about your age isn't something you type. It's something your device already knows and confirms automatically. And here's the open question you should be sitting with right now. If your OS knows your age, what else does it know? And who else can ask? We'll get to that. But first, who exactly pushed this law through? And why did they do it with such unusual enthusiasm? All right, let's talk about the reason they give. The official justification. The thing that made every California lawmaker raise their hand without hesitation. Protecting children. And look, nobody wants to argue against that. The moment you say this is about keeping kids safe online, the conversation becomes almost impossible to challenge. You sound like a monster if you push back. That's not an accident. That framing is deliberate, but here's the problem with the protect the children argument. Parental control is already a solved problem. Right now, today, any parent with a smartphone in 5 minutes can set up content filters, screen time limits, app restrictions, and even real-time monitoring for their kids' devices. Apple has Screen Time. Google has Family Link. There are dozens of third-party tools. Schools use them. Families use them. The tools exist. So why do we need a law that forces your operating system to report your age to every app and website you visit? because that's not actually what this is about. Here's what OS level age verification actually creates: a world where every device you own, your laptop, your phone, your tablet, your smart TV, maybe one day your car, only functions properly when it's linked to a verified identity: your name, your age, your account. And once every device is authenticated, and once every app can query your age through your OS, you now have a system where everything you do online is tied to who you are: browsing habits, purchases, the content you consume, the things you search for at 2 in the morning when nobody's watching. All of it. Trackable. By default. That's not a parenting tool. That's infrastructure for mass surveillance, and it was sold to you with the most sympathetic packaging imaginable. Now, here's the part that gets really interesting, because if this is really about surveillance infrastructure, you'd expect the companies that benefit most from surveillance to be supportive of it, right? So let's talk about who was in the room when this law was written. Here's a name you won't be surprised to hear: Meta. Meta, the company that owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, spent millions of dollars lobbying in California to get this law passed. And they weren't alone. OpenAI was listed as a co-sponsor. Let that sit for a moment. One of the most powerful AI companies in the world co-sponsoring an age verification law. Why would they care? What does an AI company gain from knowing how old you are? The answer, when you think about it, is obvious. Data, behavioral profiles, cleaner, more reliable user segmentation, a system where the identity attached to every action online is verified, consistent, and permanent. And then there's Apple and Microsoft, two of the three companies most directly affected by this law, since they make the operating systems it targets. You'd think they'd fight it, right? Push back publicly? Lobby against it? They were completely silent. No public statements, no opposition campaigns, no leaked emails to journalists complaining about government overreach. Nothing. And that silence speaks volumes, because Apple and Microsoft don't just comply with laws, they shape them. When they don't want something to happen, you hear about it. Their silence here is as loud as a statement. Why? Because this law, in a strange way, is great for them too. It creates what's called a compliance moat, a giant wall of legal requirements that only huge, well-funded corporations can actually satisfy. Small developers, indie app makers, new startups trying to build alternatives, they'll be crushed under the legal and technical weight of having to integrate with age verification APIs. The big players can absorb that cost easily. In fact, they're already building it. And once it's built, they own the gateway. Every interaction you have online passes through their infrastructure. Now, while the big players were calculating their advantage, one community was mostly confused and quiet. Mostly, because somewhere in the Linux world, somebody got angry. And instead of writing a blog post, they wrote a script. Quick check-in. Are you still with me? Good, because this is where it gets fun. Meet Ageless Linux. It's not a full operating system. It's not a company. It's not even a movement. Not yet, anyway. It's a script. A single, beautifully defiant shell script that does one thing. It makes your Linux system technically non-compliant with age verification laws on purpose. Here's how it works, in plain terms. When you run this script on any Debian-based Linux distribution, Ubuntu, Kali, Pop! OS, whatever you use, it does a few things. First, it modifies your operating system's metadata, the stuff that identifies what OS you're running. Then, it installs documentation, actual readable documentation, telling the state of California, formally and in writing, that this system will not comply with AB 1043, the age verification bill. And then, this is the best part, it deploys an age verification API. An actual API that doesn't work intentionally. Here's why that's legally interesting. Under the Digital Age Assurance Act, if you modify an operating system, you become, in the eyes of the law, an operating system provider, which means you're subject to all the same requirements as Apple or Microsoft. You're required to provide an accessible interface at account setup that collects user age. The addressor command in Linux does not do this. So by running this script, you've transformed yourself into a non-compliant OS provider, and technically, under Section 1798.501, subsection A, Clause 1, you could be fined $7,500 for every child in California who uses your operating system. Now, is anyone actually going to prosecute a Linux user running a personal machine? Probably not. But that's not the point. The point is that this script makes the absurdity of the law visible. It forces the question, at what point does compliance become impossible? And at what point does the law become a tool of control rather than protection? Civil disobedience has a long history, and this might be its most interesting digital chapter yet. But here's what I keep thinking about. This is one script from one person, and it's already making headlines. What happens when more people start doing this? What happens when this stops being a curiosity and becomes a movement? That question connects to something bigger, something that affects not just Linux users, but every person reading this and every kid who's going to grow up on the internet in the next decade. When I was young, the internet was a remarkable thing. You could explore it without anyone knowing who you were. You could learn without a record being kept. You could be curious, make mistakes, ask embarrassing questions, and discover yourself, all anonymously. That anonymity wasn't a loophole. It was a feature, a fundamental part of what made the internet feel like freedom. That world is disappearing, and if the trajectory we're on continues, if age verification at the OS level becomes the global standard, if every device requires a verified identity to function, if every action online is authenticated, then the internet your kids grow up on will be fundamentally different from the one that shaped us. Not just different in terms of features or interface, different in nature. An internet where you exist not as an anonymous user, but as a permanent, verified record, where the baseline assumption isn't privacy but transparency, where curiosity itself has a paper trail. Now, some people hear that and think, fine, I have nothing to hide. And maybe that's true for you, but ask yourself this. Do you want to live in a world where the infrastructure for hiding things simply doesn't exist? Where the option has been engineered away? History has a pretty consistent answer to what happens when governments and corporations gain perfect visibility into the behavior of their citizens. It doesn't go well, and here's something worth noting. This isn't just California. Similar laws are being drafted and passed in the UK, Australia, the EU, and multiple other US states. This is a coordinated global shift, and the window to push back is not unlimited. The Ageless Linux script is a small act of resistance, but small acts of resistance are how every major pushback in history begins. The question is whether enough people care before the infrastructure becomes permanent. If you're watching this and you use Linux, or you're even considering it, now is a good time to understand why the Linux community matters in this conversation, and why, right now, subscribing to channels that cover this kind of story might be more important than it sounds. Not because you'll miss a video, but because staying informed is itself a form of resistance. Let's bring this all together, because this video isn't really about a Linux script, and it's not even really about age verification. It's about a pattern. The pattern goes like this. A problem is identified, and it's always a real problem. Something that genuinely affects people, something nobody wants to defend. Child safety, terrorism, misinformation. The problem is real. Then a solution is proposed, and the solution always requires a little more visibility, a little more control, a little more infrastructure. And once that infrastructure exists, it doesn't go away. It gets repurposed, it gets expanded, it becomes the foundation for the next solution to the next problem. That's the Trojan horse dynamic, and it has worked repeatedly throughout the history of the internet and modern governance. Age verification at the OS level is not the end of this story. It's a chapter. And the next chapter, AI-assisted behavioral profiling, biometric authentication at the device level, real-time compliance monitoring, is already being written. Here's what I want you to take away from this. The fact that a single script can make this visible can force a legal and philosophical conversation about who controls your device and what rights you have over it is actually encouraging. It means the technical community still has leverage. It means that open source software still represents something important. The idea that you can own your own tools, modify your own environment, and choose not to comply with systems you believe are unjust. Linux has always been the exception to the rule, the operating system that refuses to be owned by a single corporation, the system that gives you root access to your own machine. And in a world that's increasingly trying to revoke that access in the name of safety, that matters more than ever. The Ageless Linux script will not stop this law. No single script will, but it starts a conversation, and conversations, when enough people are having them, have a way of becoming something more. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking who benefits every time someone tells you something is for your protection. Because the internet you fight for today is the one your kids will inherit tomorrow.